All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. And Matt, we've done over 850 Sales Game Changer shows. My name is Fred Diamond. I run the Institute for Effective Professional Selling. And of course, I host and produce the Sales Game Changers podcast. You can listen to all of our previous episodes and watch the videos. Go to salesgamechangerspodcast.com, salesgamechangerspodcast.com for the 850 or so previous episodes. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Give us a thumbs up. We greatly appreciate that. And of course, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. And Matt, a lot of our loyal listeners know that about a year ago, we started doing a sub-brand of the Sales Game Changers podcast. And I'm talking with Matt Radomski. That's how you pronounce your name, correct?
That's correct.
With Harness. And I'm excited because we started doing a show called Office Hours, Sales Professors Unplugged, where I interview directors of selling programs at major universities. As a matter of fact, we just had our 16th annual award event, our Sales Excellence Award event, and we gave our first Sales Educator of the Year award to Brian Collins with Virginia Tech. And you and I have known each other for a couple of years on LinkedIn primarily, and Harness had come up a couple of times in conversations with other people. So I went back out and connected with you again. And turns out that you went to Clemson and that you also participated on the sales team and had done competitions. You didn't necessarily go for a sales degree per se, but it was great to talk to you. You're a VP at Harness, and I'll ask you in a second about that. But it was nice to see the connections there, and you introduced me to the leader of the Clemson program there, and we got him into our loop as well. So a couple of our worlds are coming together, and it's great to see how you've grown in your career and how your experience at Clemson, taking sales classes and participating in competitions, et cetera, framed you for where you are now. All right. So tell us a little bit about yourselves. Tell us about Harness. Tell us what you do there, and give us a little brief introduction to your journey.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Fred, and thank you for setting the table there, especially where it all started, which was a sales class at Clemson. So as you said, I run the federal civilian business at Harness. I have lived and worked in the DC area in federal software sales. I think this is year 14 for me. So becoming a veteran slowly in the industry. Started my career at Oracle. Worked my way up from, inside from the BDR world of cold calling, setting up meetings to inside sales at Oracle, up to the field, and really owning an account. And then from there, pivoted to Salesforce when they were kind of becoming a mature sales organization in the federal space, supporting the Department of Veterans Affairs under Joe Marcourt, who I know has been on your show in the past. Worked there for 5 years, really expanding that account out, and then wanted to go smaller and wanted to be on the ground floor of creating a federal organization. So I went down to a pre-IPO company, Harness, to help the build that they had started, and it's been a really exciting journey.
Tell us a little bit about Harness. Tell us what they do.
Yeah, so the easiest way to think about Harness is it's kind of the easy button for what is historically a very messy and complicated world of software delivery. So you think about after a developer or an AI, agent writes code, the process from building that into an application and deploying it safely is extremely difficult in most organizations. And it's why, we see government and highly regulated industries take months or even quarters to deploy something new because they need to do it with security and compliance, built in. So Harness takes all of those things and at an enterprise level automates everything after code commitment to make sure that all the innovation can be done at the speed of light without any issues of worrying about downtime or security or compliance issues once something gets to production. So in the world of the Anthropics and OpenAIs of the world, doing a lot of the coding for us. there is just this giant influx of code, but there needs to be a way to get those pipelines automated out to deployment. So that is what we do, and that's what we're helping some of the biggest companies in the world and some of the largest federal agencies in the world do.
That's great. It was 30 years ago. A part of my role, I was a product manager for what was then known as automated testing.
Mhm.
And it was with a company called CompuWare in the late 90s. And it was one of we were inventing automated testing, actually. Had done a lot of it on mainframe and then, of course, on client server in the late 90s. I was deep into that space. And it's amazing that how far we've come in 30 years. So it's great to hear. It's great to have gotten caught up on what Harness does, et cetera. And as we get into this next part of the conversation, again, you've participated in sales competitions when you went to Clemson. Having started your career at Oracle and then to Salesforce, right? Those are two heavy hitters. I mean, Oracle, I've had a bunch of sales leaders on the Sales Game Changers podcast from Oracle. I've had a bunch on the show from Salesforce in the public sector and commercial side. You don't become a VP of sales at Salesforce or Oracle just because you say you want to be. There's a lot of competition. They're hard environments. Again, we're doing today's interview in April of 2026. 2025 was a very challenging year. 2026 is still challenging, a little bit more open, but give us some insights about how your college, the competitions, and studying for sales, how they framed you for where you are right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know you were introduced to Dr. Ryan Mullins, and I remember, taking his class. And when I was in college, this was the age of like Mad Men was on TV, and I thought I wanted to go into advertising. I was like, I'm going to be a marketing executive, and I took Dr. Mullins' class along with Carter McElveen and some other professors there in the sales organization. And it really changed and molded what I wanted to do into, okay, I think actually sales and being on this side of the business makes more sense for me. And so I think the first and foremost was taking the fear out of pitching and out of being in front of people. I always liked presenting, but the thought of picking up the phone and calling someone I don't know was kind of a daunting task for a college kid. And so getting through that and learning the tools of how to add value and deliver value on your first 10 seconds, 15 seconds, was something that I got through that before I ever graduated. So I remember walking into Oracle and there was a class of 60 people that all had just graduated college, getting into their first job and being two or three steps ahead of people because I had already gotten past that fear, which is, I think, most new sales reps, it's what they struggle with the most. And I could just hit the ground running. So it was really impactful for me to have some of the basic tools from graduating college going into that first role at especially like you said, a kind of a cutthroat sales environment like Oracle.
That's a great answer. One thing we talk a lot about that we've learned on the Office Hours Sales Professor show is that they're preparing the young adults to be a couple years ahead,
Yeah.
right, than the average student. I like the way you just described that. When you graduated, you got past the fear that everybody goes through, even those who are very successful and seasoned. You know, as we say, there's a 99% chance you're going to be rejected,
Yeah.
right? Even with a customer, especially now, people don't have to answer their phone and, they don't have to reply to you, even if you're an existing customer and you're bringing them more value, right?
Mhm.
So you starting there, I like the way you said that. You were a couple of years ahead of the competition. And for the companies that are investing in the young professionals, young adults who are coming out of colleges, either with a major, minor, or just having taken a couple of classes and getting exposed to that, there's a huge advantage for the companies that are doing that. Just kind of curious also, again, we mentioned blue chips, Oracle and Salesforce. Like I said, I have a lot of people who have been leaders there historically. Of course, Salesforce was created, from Oracle,
Sure.
or at least, some of the leaders, one particular Benioff, the leader. But give us some of your lessons from those two companies, having worked at, they're kind of like, for people who don't know, who are listening to today's show, that's kind of like the New York Yankees and the Dodgers, right?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
technology. And good for you for getting a job for both of those companies early in your career. What are a couple things that you took away from them that have stayed with you, that have allowed you to progress your career?
I'll do lessons from two people who I know you know as well. So at Oracle, when I was trying to go from inside sales to the field, I tapped Lee Fisher, who at the time had just gone into leadership at the first time at Oracle, and he had a really, really successful field career as a field AE. And I was just asking him, like, what is the difference in going from this inside role that's a little more transactional to trying to build up these enterprise and really transformative type opportunities for your customers? Like, what did you do differently that other people missed? And Lee told me this story about staying with a customer, if it wasn't overnight, and maybe it was like till midnight or 1 in the morning, trying to stand up a new system. It was maybe an engineered system or new deployment they were doing, because his whole thing was that, the customer's success was his success. And even though the deal was done, the sale had been made, his job was to make sure that his customer was successful and that he helped them every step of the way. And I think he told me, he was like, there's nothing I could do technically. I'm not an expert, but I showed my commitment to their success and I was there if they needed something. If there was a lever that needed to be pulled, I was legitimately right there next to them. So what Lee taught me, which was really impactful, was like the customer is the North Star. You need to, their success should be your success and everything else figures itself out. Like, don't focus on selling, focus on their value and what that matters to them, and then you'll help them along the way. So that's my Oracle lesson. My Salesforce lesson is Joe Marquardt.
Yeah.
So Papa Joe, the AVP when I was at Salesforce, he had a quote that I actually have written down. I won't pull it up, but I have written down. I put it when I talk to my team, which is if you don't have a plan, you become part of someone else's plan.
Mm.
And his was, taught me, and he ingrained it in me, which is you have to come to every meeting, every week, every day with a plan, or you will just get caught in the motions. And it really helped me structure, not just maybe an opportunity, but a big part of my career, which is just, having a plan and trying to execute on that plan as the best you can. Um,
Yeah, those are great stories. And actually, Lee and Joe have both been on the podcast. Joe has been on twice. He was actually the very first person at Salesforce that I interviewed. And actually, we originally got through him through a guy named Anthony Robbins, who ran NVIDIA public sector for a number of years.
okay.
He had a guy working from him named Rick Simmons, and Rick said, "You need to meet this guy named Joe."
Yeah.
And I remember learning from him. The other lesson about from Lee, and Lee has been on the podcast. Lee has also, we do regular events for people listening every month at the Karasoff Conference and Collaboration Center, where we bring a
Mhm.
panel of 3 to 4 great sales leaders. And Lee was on one of our panels in 2025. And I've heard stories from some of the sales leaders that are legends in my mind who have called on customers at 3 in the morning, right? And the story that you just told is a great one in that the sale doesn't end with the sale, right?
Right.
Especially in the types of companies that we're talking about here, because you want to grow the accounts and you got to prove that you're successful to go. Even if you're like doing great in a agency or a big corporation, maybe you're hitting 5, 10% in a lot of cases. So you want to keep growing. So showing the customer that you're going to be there with them till everything gets up and running. Those are great lessons from two great sales leaders. I'm also interested. You came out of college and you went right into the federal vertical. And I
Yeah.
talk about this all the time. When salespeople ask me, young sales professionals, I say you need to be very, very knowledgeable in one of two things, either the customer's marketplace, right?
Mhm.
We're going to talk about federal here in a second, or your product and technology, but you got to be like leagues above everybody else to get to the elite level. So you'd made a decision earlier in your career that you were going to focus on federal. And
Mhm.
for people who are listening who don't know, there's an expression that federal, even with Doge and cutbacks and employee layoffs, et cetera, federal employee layoffs, it's still Fortune 1,
Mhm.
and use the analogy of Fortune 500. I was on a session today where they talked about how the federal IT budget is about 137 billion, right?
Mhm.
So that's just not all going to the oracles of the world. Give us some insights on why you made that decision to focus on that vertical market.
Yeah, this is a funny one, and I have to actually peel this back a little bit to tell you the background. So, I got to Oracle through cold outreach.
Mm.
So, out of college, Dr. Andrea Dixon at Baylor, her daughter was a friend of mine growing up and interned at Oracle.
Mm.
I basically did Google research and said, what are the top 10 best paying software companies for software sales? I knew I wanted to be in tech. I'd interned at a Series A tech company, but I wanted to start big and I wanted to start somewhere with a good foundation. And I reached out to Taylor Dixon and I said,
Mm.
"Hey, you're an intern. Can you give me some names of these people who are hiring?" So she name dropped the director of their BDR program. I cold outreach, cold called him, got an interview, and so I'm going through the interview process, and I am 5 steps behind everyone that is kind of a pipeline out of college to these programs. And so I'm doing everything I can to stick out. And one of the questions they asked me was, if you were hired here at Oracle, where would you want to be? And they were hiring 90% of the people for Austin, Texas. I had already been looking at apartments. I just thought I was moving to Texas. But in my back pocket, I said, oh, well, Larry Ellison founded Oracle by creating, it was Project Oracle, which was the database for the CIA. So I said, I think it's really, really cool that Oracle kind of started in DC in the public sector. But so, I'd love to be anywhere, Silicon Valley where headquarters is, Texas where this new sales organization is, or even DC in the public sector. So I thought that was a great answer, and I thought that would just help me stick out. And when I got hired, they told me you were so passionate about the public sector business that we're sending you to DC. And so I had to call my dad and say, scrap the plans. We're not going to Austin. I got to pack up and go find an apartment in the DC area. So it happened by accident, and then I ended up making a career out of it. So and I've loved every minute of it.
That's great. And also, thanks for reminding me. Actually, that was how we actually reconnected
Yeah.
is when we did my post again for the office hours, Sales Professors Unplugged. I interviewed now known as Dr. Andre Dixon,
Yeah.
and it was a great show. And she is truly one of the top two or three leaders in education for young adults in colleges at Baylor. Did a great show with her. And then I saw you had commented and it didn't hit me at first, and then I realized and reached back out to Dr. Dixon. She had some very nice things to say, so that's great. What advice do you have for young sales professionals? Again, you've done very well so far in a relatively short amount of time, and we've talked about the journey to get there. But give us two or three things that you advise young professionals, young sales professionals, to get to the level where you are.
I would say first and foremost, be extremely curious. So when you're in an inside role or you're in a BDR role, you kind of have this very structured responsibility, right? Hey, I'm responsible for outreach, or I'm responsible for closing deals up to this threshold. But if you don't intend on your career ending at that role, you should be
Mhm.
really curious about the role that's next. So, what I talked about earlier, what I did with Lee, I knew that even if I wasn't going to be promoted or get to the field, I needed to know the things that he did or that others in that industry that were successful did to be prepared. And so I remember as an inside sales rep, I was mapping up to Josh Miller and Jay Smith, who was the leader at Oracle. And I asked anytime I could be in the meeting for a deal I wasn't a part of, but it was out of my scope. Could I just kind of sit in the corner? Could I be a part of it? Could I see how the deal structure was made? Can I be added to this spreadsheet? And those things, even though I was not maybe participating, soaking it up like a sponge was really, really impactful. And it helped me when I was trying to get prepared for that next role, have some insight, and again, hit the ground running when I got the opportunity.
That is a great story. And I've told the story many, many times. Early in my career, when I was working at Apple Computer, I was working in marketing. And my boss said to me, we're only going to be valuable if we help in the sales process. Apple was, of course, one of the top marketing companies in the history of business. But I did the same thing. He said, I want you to go into every sales meeting. And I would sit in the back and listen. And in the beginning, they were wondering, why is Fred in this room? And then I paid attention, and then I would ask good questions when I felt it was right. And then they started noticing that I was doing a little bit of extra homework and giving some insights. And then eventually I noticed I was sitting at the table. And again, I wasn't taking over the meeting because that wasn't my place. But for the for the young sales professionals, and even if you're listening to this and you're in marketing, we have a lot of marketing people listening. Think about the value that you're adding to the sales process. And the only way that you can understand that is by doing what Matt just suggested, by having as many conversations with the sales professionals as possible. I love the way you keep bringing up some of these great sales leaders that you soaked up knowledge from and you learned, and they, you know what, they want to share. They are, people ask me this all the time. It's like, how would I approach, someone who's 20 years older than me, to ask them questions about their career? I said, reach out to them and say, can we meet for coffee 9 o'clock at Starbucks,
Hmm.
the local town square, whatever it might be? And they're going to say yes. I mean, give them, come prepared with the questions,
Right.
ask them things that they can answer. Just don't say, how can I get better? So that is great. Matt, I want to get some of your insights. Again, you're obviously a thoughtful guy. What are customers telling you these days? Again, federal marketplace, is challenging 2025. It's still challenging, a lot of cutbacks, et cetera, but it's still a humongous marketplace with, even with, you know, continuing resolutions and things like that. It's still 137 billion in IT is going to be spent in 2026. What are customers telling you? What are customer engagements looking right now? What do customers want from selling professionals?
Yeah, I think there's two kind of routes to go here. So, route number one, like from what they're looking to move towards organizationally or structurally, is there seems to be these shifts, right? You see these shifts in technology where it's like we want all these best of breed solutions, and we're gonna start putting them together and start molding them and customize things. We're seeing kind of a shift towards we want consolidation. We want, having 100 contracts, 1,000 contracts, 10,000 contracts, depends how big the organization is becoming a burden on these organizations. So consolidation, standardization, having, single platform, single policy, is really, really a move that we're seeing, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector, right? So it is funny to see how that has shifted, and there's these ebbs and flows, and we're kind of coming back to, centralized platforms, single pane of glass, is helping organizations stay structured and stay organized, especially in like a compliant heavy world. Number two, on the technology side, also these shifts, they almost always come back to how do we get services and technology and systems out to our customer? It could be, a constituent, it can be a veteran, it could be a war fighter in my world, or it could be, a consumer customer if you're in the commercial or enterprise space. Um, it is about getting those out effectively, easily, securely, and getting those services, to the people that need them. And we saw a lot of this be customized 10, 15 years ago. And then we
Yep.
saw this shift to like no code, low code, that Salesforce days of being able to say, hey, we have this platform where we can get out these tools and these applications really quickly and securely with drag and drop. Might not need a developer. And now we see this shift kind of back where the creating code, right, and being able to develop software is becoming faster than ever because of Claude and because of OpenAI and all these new dev tools coming out. And it's, well, we can customize things really, really fast, but we need to make sure it gets to the consumer in a secure way. And we need to, maybe pump the brakes on areas where AI is coming in and creating chaos. So it's adding structure around that. So it's really interesting that no matter what, the end result is how do we get our solutions out to a customer and how do we serve the customer, but how organizations are doing it continues to change depending on what the technology landscape looks like in front of them.
That's great, Matt. I want to thank you for being on today's show. You brought back some great names, some great lessons that we share. As also, it was great to be able to tie in the fact that you took some college classes in sales and that you were able to deploy that while you were in college, and proving what we've been saying for the last year is that the young adults who are getting trained on sales, and your degree wasn't in sales. What was your degree in again?
So I was a marketing major,
Oh, okay.
marketing major, minor in business administration or business some other business piece, and then I got a sales certificate. So I think that was the accreditation at the time.
Gotcha. So before I end today's show, I'm going to ask you for a specific action step. Just give us two habits, two things that you do that you can attribute a lot of your success to, and then I'm going to ask you for your final action step.
So I think the first one is I am a Sunday night planner. So
Hmm.
I like to organize my week on Sunday night. My wife and I do this in our personal lives because we have two little kids, and then I do this with work as well of getting my week ahead of me and figuring out like what does success for my week look like before that week actually starts. Uh, Number two is I always try to have very realistic goals, but I set the benchmark really high at the beginning of the year. So I start every fiscal year the same way by mapping out my knowns and unknowns and trying to kind of figure out the gap to the goal that I'm setting. And I think those things at like a very tactical level week to week, and then a very strategic level for the year have helped me along in my career.
Very good. I once again I want to thank Matt Radomski with Harness. Thank you so much for tying in. This is a great show that we tied in a lot of things that we're talking about on other Sales Game Changers podcasts and of course the Office Hours show. So thanks for that and congratulations for the success you've had so far in your career. Give us a final thought or a final action step that you recommend selling professionals do right now, maybe even to your team, to help them take their sales career to the next level.
I'm going to repeat one that I did earlier, which is the Joe Marquardt quote: "Is if you don't have a plan, you become part of someone else's plan." So my number one action is always put together a plan, be organized and structured, and if you create those tools and those structures for not only your day to day, but your week by week, quarter by quarter, everything else will roll into place.
All right, very good. All right, once again, I want to thank Matt Radomski. My name is Fred Diamond. This is the Sales Game Changers podcast.